Okay, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? All right, so first of all, welcome to the Center for Maritime Strategy's second annual Wargaming event series. We're very pleased that you could all join us, and if you haven't checked in your folder sheets, we're going to start with our first panel with leaders in naval postgraduate education. Then after that panel, we'll move the focus of the room to this side, where we will have a series of game demonstrations that'll go on for about an hour and 15 minutes. And after that, we'll have a cleanup panel with the game designers themselves that can answer your questions about how they build games and the value of games to them within what they do. So without further ado, I'm going to take a seat here, introduce our very distinguished panel, and we will go ahead and kick off with a conversation about the use of wargaming within our naval postgraduate institutions. And of course, immediately to my left, first of all, we're joined by the president of the Naval Postgraduate School, Vice Admiral Ann Rondo. We're very glad that she could join us today.
Thanks, Steve.
And I'm also joined by Director of Wargaming from Marine Corps University's Krulak Center, Mr. Tim Barrick. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
And finally, President of the Naval War College, Rear Admiral Pete Garvin. Sir, thank you for joining us today as well.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. War games can give us some ideas on how to approach conflicts, but they're not a blueprint for victory. That said, games tell us a lot about how we can win by showing us all of the potential options. Again, I'm very pleased to welcome our panel with us here today to talk about their perspective, naval education institutions employing wargaming as both an educational tool and as a practical exercise in developing warfighting qualifications amongst their students. So what I'd like to do is kick off with my first question for each of our panelists. And Admiral Rondo, I'll start with you, and we'll just go through and have a conversation about this. I'd like to ask each of you to discuss how wargaming is used within your respective institutions to develop both warfighting capacity and the training of individual warfighters that attend your institution. So, ma'am, if you could kick us off.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank Steve and the Navy League for this opportunity. I do think that, frankly, wargaming has been going on arguably since the Prussians, but indeed, I believe it has changed in many qualities, and so I think that this is the time, it's the right time to talk about and activate and actualize and apply wargaming. At NPS, we have a lot of different kinds of things that we do. But ultimately, our goal and our objective and our mission is to improve warfighting and warfighters. And so there are many ways to do that. But wargaming is the context of all that. So for us, one of the monikers for us is that wargaming is warfighting. And that's an important piece to think about. So we do this in many different ways. For many years, we have been teaching designing of wargaming. So we have students who come in and we teach them how to design war games. The reason why that's important is our intent here is to feed the fleet and the force with young, bright officers who know how to help their bosses design and develop war games, teaching people essentially how to fish and to give them self-sufficiency in their ability to do that. So we're all about trying to do that. And for us, it's also about experiential learning. So for wargaming, we certainly don't put in the violence, the lethality and the violence of war. It's just almost impossible to actually come to an exquisitely pristine experience. But we do give context. So the stresses, the speed, the intensity of decision making, the rapid fire data and information that comes to you, and then the whole notion about how you do that and the implications of it. And one of the important things is to set up what are your assumptions, and do not carelessly make assumptions, make studied assumptions that then get you to better decision making. So I don't want to, Steve. I got a lot of things that we're doing, and I could go on, but essentially, it's about experience, analytics, exploration, and it's different than COA analysis, exploration, and then the decision making that comes in to that in a faster OODA loop, in a more urgent OODA loop, in a more dense OODA loop, and really working to make the decision making exquisitely accurate.
Thanks, ma'am. I appreciate that. That's excellent. Tim, do you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about Marine Corps University's efforts along the same lines?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and talk about wargaming and Marine Corps University. So what's unique about the Marine Corps University is we've got a very wide-ranging mission from enlisted education through our resident courses, non-resident, the captain's course with Expeditionary Warfare School, Command Staff College, School of Advanced Warfighting, and then our Marine Corps War College. So the wargaming requirements really span the whole spectrum from historical scenarios and games where we're teaching the fundamentals about the art of war and theory and nature of war, that through various case studies and games we have the opportunity to showcase that through a historical war game. But then really the key mandate, and this really has been something here in the last few years that's been a driving focus that we're trying to improve in the courses, is wargaming as a centerpiece, as a forcing function to learning joint warfighting, and also with respect to great power conflict and competition. And this ranges from very tactical level scenarios, depending on the school, where we're at the battalion to Marine Expeditionary Unit level, where game turns span hours. That's a very tactical level scenario where it's focused on combined arms, on the interaction of the systems, the players really learning different missiles and systems as the game is a forcing function to the players, learning how to employ the different systems and how to use them and synchronize them in an interaction from a joint force standpoint. But then the other piece is learning the adversary capabilities. And something that I always talk to the faculty and students about is, and this is a Wayne Hughes quote, is, to know tactics, you have to know weapons and systems. And wargaming is in my view, the best way from a learning standpoint to learn those, because you're forced to employ them. And then that goes all the way up to strategic level games at our War College, where now we're at the truly global level. Like this week, we have a global conflict game that the students at our Marine Corps War College are playing, and they're doing that planning right now, where we have students as Russia, China, the United States, and different combatant commands, and they're wargaming at the global level. So we have really a wide spectrum, and it's a mandate from historical games to build that foundation of the art of war and the basic theories and fundamentals, to we have to war game also the contemporary environment, because the war games help our students learn the systems of today, the problems of today, the geography and geopolitics that are part of today's dynamics. And we would be remiss of us to just do the historical focus. So part of the challenge here is the balance between historical case studies across the curriculum, balanced with contemporary warfighting. And then the other interesting area that unfortunately we don't get enough time in the courses to really explore is that distant future, 10, 15, 20 years in the future, and wargaming different hypothetical future states. So, there's obvious benefit in focusing on that future state. So the purpose of these games really, because we have such a wide range of schools, can be as simple as, the PRAC app from a planning problem, all the way to, really the focus is decision making and helping them build the mental models that will help them make decisions in the future. I wish we had more time to do more war games. I think our biggest challenge right now is time, and the amount that we try to pack into the curriculum.
Of course.
Can be a challenge, but But that's a very wide range set of missions for wargaming at Marine Corps University.
That's outstanding, and we're going to get into wargaming and current events here very soon. But I want to move next to Admiral Garvin from the home of wargaming in many ways for the service.
Okay, can I get a mic check? Can you hear okay? All right, we got it turned on. So thank you very much, and I'll echo my panelists in saying thank you for the opportunity to be here and to have this important discussion. As you just mentioned, it's forefront in our mind. We were most recently, in the last year, named the Wargaming Pillar Lead for the United States Navy, and we take that responsibility and that honor very, very seriously, and obviously working with our partners to expand the capacity side of wargaming, because what you just described, we suffer as well. The good news and the bad news is people want to wargame a lot, and that's excellent, but we do have capacity issues across the entire enterprise. But I'd like to step it back, and to Admiral Rondeau's earlier point, wargaming, it's not new. I mean, some of the methodologies and some of the techniques are new, and certainly some of the enablers are new, and I'm eager to talk about those things. But for those that don't know or weren't tracking necessarily, during the interwar years, Newport was the home of wargaming for much of what was done in the Pacific Theater. And upon reflection, Admiral Nimitz was known to have said that the only thing that they did not predict through gaming in Newport was kamikazes. And again, that's with the benefit of a couple decades of reflection, and you might imagine why we didn't predict kamikazes, which of course is a projection of cultural values on another culture that might have kept us from thinking of that. And then to take it to sort of present day, the mission of the United States Naval War College is kind of bifurcated, right? So we inform today's decision makers and we educate tomorrow's leaders. And in both cases, we use wargaming as well as the standard curriculum. So on the educate tomorrow's leaders side of the house, it's more of the pedagogical, kind of what you were talking about. So think Leyte Gulf, think going back to the Peloponnesian Wars, think about just those sort of historical examples, again, to teach essentially the art of wargaming without necessarily getting into the classified side of things. And then the bifurcation over to the informing today's decision makers is think our global war games, our CNO-directed war games, at the very highest levels of classification with numbers exceeding 500 people bursting at the seams at Newport, Rhode Island. And again, these are informing today's decision makers about concepts to the near and far future, but also in today's real capabilities. So that's the kind of the bifurcation of wargaming at the United States Naval War College. Our challenge, much like Tim was talking about, is how do you get more of the contemporary, the classified, the truly exquisite things into the main curriculum such that our younger generation will benefit from that knowledge.
Thanks very much, sir. And certainly our next question, we're going to get into current day conflicts that are raging throughout the globe and what input they have to the wargaming process. I certainly agree with your point about getting updated modern material in there. When I used to teach the Joint Maritime Operations class in the non-resident program, my favorite scenario that the students always liked was the Falklands War one because it included cruise missiles, nuclear submarines, and other modern-day equipment. And with that, let me ask all of our panelists our second question. How have all the ongoing conflicts in the world, specifically the war in Ukraine, the wider Middle East conflict to include our current Red Sea operations, how have those affected what you're doing at your institutions in terms of wargaming? Thank you.
Well, for one thing, let's take Ukraine, and it goes back to, again, Wayne Hughes. Leaders matter. And had President Zelensky not stood firm, I think it'd be a very different war game today. So leaders matter, and that is a Wayne Hughes principle that people matter in war no matter what you do. So I think that that's one of the things that you can look at with Ukraine and say that that is a principle that has been proven over and over again. Certainly, we've been using the Red Sea and Ukraine to construct scenarios, and how you look at those through our warfighting continuum work that we do out of the OR department. But in either case, you're learning both vicariously and deliberately. So when I talk about vicariously, it's those surprises, those things you were not expecting. And for Ukraine particularly, it's about adaptation under fire. So you learn about these things vicariously, but then you need to analyze them deliberately as to what they mean, how they got there, where they're going. Does it matter? So you need to have some deliberative learning by what you have vicariously acquired. So that's what Ukraine and the Red Sea give us, is the need to be disciplined about what we're seeing and to be very deliberative about what we are understanding. And I want to also, when I'm looking at Tim, I want to thank Tim. You have been able to do something really cool, and that is your various tournaments and your wargaming tournaments. And we've been proud at NNPS to be invited to do those. And really want to thank you for what we're learning and doing in those Marine Corps MCU tournaments. Great stuff for us.
Oh, thank you,
Thanks,
Bam.
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Bam. I think the impact, I'm going to really bend this down into two areas of impact with the ongoing conflicts. I think number one is it's changing the future scenarios and challenging that. Like you think about, future, wargaming a future Russia-NATO conflict and really being challenged with thinking about what might that look like if that were to happen from a hypothetical. And what's challenging in that is, if you project 10 years into the future, what is the end state in Ukraine in the next years? What kind of assumptions do you need to make about that? What is the state of the Russian military, and how have they learned the lessons of the Ukraine war and applied that to be a better military force? And so what kind of assumptions do you make about Russia 10 years in the future? And so that really becomes a challenging dynamic as we think about those scenarios. And then it also, you look at the war and the character of that war, and then as we war game other scenarios, do those look like Ukraine, or is Ukraine unique in the way it's fought and the combined arms interactions, and how might the combined arms interactions that we see in Ukraine play in other theaters and other scenarios, right? So it really becomes a challenging dilemma from a scenario standpoint of, you have this example of a pretty significant ongoing conflict with a major power, right, nuclear power, and then what does that mean as we war game future scenarios? A student is grounded in the news of today. It's a hot topic, and if we throw a scenario at them that doesn't resonate, if it doesn't make sense, so we've got to keep it kind of current and up to date, and tell a story in the scenario about explaining what happens in the future relative to the conflicts of today, right? So that has become a challenge for us from a wargaming standpoint, is trying to keep scenarios resonating with the students and then questioning how those apply. So that's category one, is just the impact on scenarios. Certainly. And then category two is challenging our adjudication models. So, the perfect example is air defense. And as we war gamed Ukraine just before it started, our war games had air defenses basically being annihilated in the first 2 days. And clearly that was wrong, right? And the human factors that we've seen applied in Ukraine, I mean, that's a timeless truth about warfare, that the human factors matter a lot. But Ukraine has really reinforced that before the conflict, in building orders of battle, the equipment set for Ukraine, the equipment set for Russia, pretty much about the same, very similar. I mean, there's differences, but very similar to where you'd argue, okay, these are battalion versus battalion, roughly equal. But what we've seen unfold on the ground is the human factors make a significant difference in that. So what has been challenging as a war game designer is looking at our adjudication models, seeing how the combat interactions are unfolding in Ukraine, and then questioning, and the Red Sea, right? With drones and the ships and the interactions that we see in the Red Sea. And now we have a real world example where we can look at that and then look at our adjudication models and say, do we have this right? Another example is hypersonic munitions, like the Russian Kinzhals. And we look at, the performance in Ukraine and then being, a certain number of them being engaged and shot down, and it's like, hey, the Patriot is capable of, engaging and shooting some of these things down. And before that, at least at the unclassed level and in our adjudication models, hypersonic missiles had a bit of a mythology around them that now is being challenged and questioning, how capable are these various systems. So that's why I just boil it down to those two as scenarios, and then adjudication models, there's definitely an impact.
That certainly sounds familiar. Admiral Garvin, go ahead, please, sir.
No, absolutely, and I'll riff a little bit off of some of what my other panelists have said, which I agree with wholeheartedly. So if you think about it, this use of hybrid and unmanned naval capabilities, both in terms of what's going on the Black Sea as well as the Red Sea, both go directly to the character of war and the speed with which it's changing. And the application of not just humans in the loop, there's the leadership aspect, which is an enduring feature, I assure you. How did that 96-hour war go, right? And here we are. But also the speed of innovation and at relevant speeds such that you're out innovating your adversary. I don't think we predicted that. In fact, I'm certain we didn't predict that. So it goes to your point about adjudication. And to that end, and I'll riff into a little bit of the question about that. At our most recent global, we incorporated 7 different modeling and simulation tools, as well as a command visualization tool. And I think my CIO would tell you we tested the limits of our own computing capability and crashed it a couple of times. But again, just to see what the different models were putting out as compared to what our assumptions were and to what the real world would tell you. So again, super interesting time in both areas. The old parable is true. May you live in interesting times, and we're eager to learn from it.
Hey, thanks, sir. And everything that all of you have said about the human factor especially matters, and how that adjusts and changes war games. Many people may remember, if you've seen any old Cold War era war games, that the then Soviet Slava class cruiser was supposed to be able to take 4 harpoon hits and keep going.
NAVTAG. Remember NAVTAG?
Exactly, sir. NAVTAG, for those who remember it. And it was a nearly indestructible ship. And we saw what happened to Moskva in the course of the early part of the Ukraine conflict, with only 2 missile hits, and the crew of that ship quickly abandoned ship in an attempt to conduct damage control efforts. So, as all of our panelists said, people matter, and certainly Captain Hughes's ghost, if he were here, would agree. Maybe that extra chair is there for him. Let me move to another question, and some of our panelists have already touched on this, but I want to ask a question about feedback. And can each of you tell us what feedback you received from operational level commanders, again, based on wider world issues? For example, we care a lot more about logistics now because we're talking about logistics throughout the wider world. So there have been a number of logistics-based games that I know have taken place recently. So Admiral Rondeau, if we can start with you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Sure. So I went down a whole list from indeed fleet and force feedback. Number of things. A better way to have a physics-based, OR-based adjudication, and my applause and compliments back to the War College. Captain O'Hara there has done some extraordinary work in that kind of demand signal from the fleet. Better physics-based and OR-based adjudication. A better way to have distributed wargaming. Yes, in-person wargaming is good, but in fact, war is taught is experienced in a distributed way. It's not all in one place. So how do you do distributed wargaming? Classified wargaming, what Admiral Garvin had talked about, an intense need, and it goes fast into TSSCI if you bring in space. It just goes fast. And it goes pretty fast when you're doing undersea. So how to do more work that is at a high level of classification and include all the players who need to be included. I'm going to get to that in a minute because we want to also have a sense of more international, they want a sense of more international actors because the partners who come in, part of wargaming is also trust building. And if you do wargaming with international partners when it is appropriate and good for both sides, it will build trust. So that's another demand signal, and an adamant foot stomping demand signal. Stop white carding. Don't white card the SOF, don't white card space, don't white card logistics, don't white card your C2 annex. White carding is one of our greatest issues right now, and the fleet sees it, the force sees it, and they want to stop the white carding. The next thing is to integrate AI. AI inside wargaming is important. Right now, we have a Marine Lieutenant Colonel at NPS. He's a PhD candidate whose entire work is being done on the AI role in wargaming and how that matters. Not afraid of it, but indeed optimizing it and leveraging it. So Lieutenant Colonel Black is doing that, and his next job will be at the Wargaming Center in Quantico. So this is really a great way to do this, and the fleet wants that. Then two last things: post-game analysis and lessons learned analysis. And we can work more on those things, but those things are also, that's the list of commentary that I get from the fleet end of the force about wargaming.
Thanks, ma'am. And just can you reiterate, white carding is when you just give them a pass, right? And
You give them a pass and assume away their factors, their impact, their weaknesses, their contributions. You just assume away an entire series of competencies or weaknesses that you'll never identify. And the white carding, I was down to San Diego at NSW at Naval Special Warfare, and it was stunning as to how much SOF is white carded. Oh, they'll go do their thing. And so it's really an important piece, and we white card it. We have been white carding since I came in as an ensign. When I was in fleet communications, and they white carded that that fleet comms would be okay. So we need to really think about white carding.
yeah, and those people don't get to play then either. So, Tim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to cover one topic, and we had this small thing in the Marine Corps called force design that's occurred over the last 4 years. And, you know, what that has done is obviously we've stood up a new kind of unit with a new mission, specifically the Marine Littoral Regiment, and integrating that into our courses, into scenarios, and employing it has been a forcing function for change. And, you know, just this past year, as an example of that, at our Expeditionary Warfare School, you know, normally when they teach the amphibious operations package, it's all about, you know, ship-to-shore maneuver and, you know, working the amphibious plans from an offensive standpoint. This year, for the first time, they did that, and then they shift into the counter-landing plan, and, you know, working a Marine Littoral Regiment with how do you defend against an amphibious operation and implement sea denial, and looking at, you know, concepts of naval warfighting associated with that. And that's been, particularly at our captain's course with Expeditionary Warfare School, that's become a focus that was new this past year for the first time doing that. So that also has impacts at our other schools in looking at, you know, different concepts around that, and just factoring that into the planning, into the logistics considerations, the force employment, you know, fires decision making, and all of that.
Thanks very much. Admiral Garvin, sir, please.
Thank you very much. As to fleet feedback, we get quite a bit of it, and it's wonderful. In general terms, it truly is. Again, if they're not asking, you're not relevant, and if you're not relevant, you shouldn't be there. So we gratefully accept the feedback that we do receive, and most of it has to do with capacity. They want more of wargaming capacity. Not that it's a panacea and it solves all the world's problems. There's no magic that's going to pop out of wargaming that's going to tell you how to win every war, but they certainly do learn an awful lot. With regard to specific feedback, I'll give you a couple examples. So in the Fifth Fleet, I won't name names, but we were requested to send a couple of folks over to help think beyond the 48-hour window. With respect particularly to how things were going to game out with regard to things going on in the Red Sea. We sent two folks over with much fear and trepidation in my heart because I didn't know if we were going to get them back. But thankfully they were there for 2 weeks and did a lot of great work for the commander, and we did receive them back. If you think in terms of NAVUR, NAVAF, with what's going on in the Black Sea in particular, the commander served as a mentor for our MAWS graduates, and he liked what he saw so much that he came back, obviously took some of the concepts, and we were mindful of classification here, and put them to use. And then one of the top students in that class got this thing called orders. They don't call them invitations, oddly enough, but he is now out there working those problem sets in real world. And if you hearken back to the Global series, the comment of the commander at the conclusion of the Global War Game, the most recent Global War Game, was this: it is a step change in wargaming that's going on. And so he's super excited. So it goes directly to relevance of what we're doing in the wargaming side of the house. But I'll answer your final portion of your question more directly, which goes to contested logistics. You asked about that. So we run a series. We've run 4, I think. Mike, correct me at 100%. Or the 4th one is coming up October 28th. That's right. Nickelwig. So Navy Contested Logistics War Game. And again, it goes directly to Admiral Rondeau's point, right? We used to sort of white card. Things were just going to magically show up. And that, beyond a certain point from the shores of the United States, it was largely a safe place to be. Well, we know the world is not quite like that. And oh, by the way, even if it were a completely safe place to be, we've all seen how shipping can be very easily disrupted just by accidents. So again, we're running the next in that series of games coming up, and it is rather interesting to see how the interplay of classified capabilities with what is a largely unclassified logistics supply chain kind of worldwide.
And many civilians involved in that as well, certainly,
Exactly.
too. So the important thing that I think all of you brought up in that answer is that you are busy at training actual warfighting people that will go back out to the fleet and to the Marine Corps and perform and learn from these functions and go back out and use these in the real world. And with that thought, let me ask our panelists one final question, and then we'll go ahead and move to some audience question and answer. I'd like to know what you need as far as an academic institution from the wargaming community. You've got some representatives from the wargaming wider, the people who make and design games. And part of this panel series is to bring together the people that make and design games, not only for fun, for profit and other things, but with military leaders who use games, as our panelists have said, to help make choices. So if I could ask you all, what do you need from the gaming community or the wargaming world that would help do your job better? Ma'am, go ahead if you would.
So wargaming implies, just kind of in the mindset, military versus military. And in fact, a real war in the world today must be and will be a federation of capabilities and capacities. So I see Augie Tellez sitting in the front row. I've known Augie for a long time. When I was the deputy commander, and I was also with MSC. Augie was one of the leaders in the civilian commercial shipping world, and he still is. That world is very involved in any kind of war. So bringing in a federation of the commercial side that's going to be involved. I'll give you a quick story. When Afghanistan went down, I was the deputy commander at Transcom. There was an assumption based upon modeling and based upon contracts that the craft business, that civilian aviation would answer the call for shipping materials to Afghanistan by way of Pakistan, everything. Their insurance companies weren't so sure. So now the insurance equity becomes dominant to the agreement that commercial airlines had with the U.S. government. So the first commercial aviation assets that went into Afghanistan and Pakistan was DHL. Because their insurance was more geared about NATO and about war. So you have these assumptions that go on in all of the federation of people who will be involved. So having the war games take it, as Admiral Winterfeld said yesterday in his comments, nation to nation is really important. So bringing in all the things that you hadn't thought about, which is going to be part of that war game. So I would say to those who are designing war games, bring in the black swans, bring in the things you don't know, because what you don't know is what will kill you. And so being able to understand that and not make the game so pro forma that the winner is obvious. And you got to make it so that the winner is not obvious. And then on the games, really analyze what it means to have assumptions, because assumptions set you up for your decision making and your belief. So if your assumptions inform your belief and belief inform action, you're going to make the wrong decisions if you made bad assumptions. And you got to live with those. So let me give you another example of that. The most recent Keen Edge, I had a 3-star admiral come in and tell me with exasperation that as the U.S. was losing in some of the exercise, he had a number of his great officers come in and say, "Can we change the assumptions? We're losing."
Oops.
And he said, "I got to teach my folks what that means to make the wrong assumptions." So this is real stuff. So for the game designers, bring in the Federation, bring in the others that matter, bring in the internationals and what they're doing. Bring it all in, because the fog of war is bad enough. If we game it as clear and blue-eyed, and blue skied, we will fail. And our intent, the War College, MCU, and us, is to succeed and win.
Thanks, ma'am. Tim, if you would go ahead on that.
Yeah, I think first off, to the professional wargaming community is, first off, keep making games, right? It's an evolving world out there, and we need to continually go back and improve our game tools. And there's the other aspect of that is, by domain, looking at the different domains, and there's a lot of work to be done because the interaction of the capabilities of today and tomorrow is something that is still needs further examination in our different game methodologies and how to effectively wargame those, and particularly in a span of time. Time is a precious commodity, and in speaking specifically from the education world, I get a lot of folks that want the fast food war game, right? Where it's like, hey, give me a 2-hour event or even a 1-hour event. And, I struggle with trying to deliver something that is worth playing in 45 minutes, right? So I think, the range of game tools that can be done in a very short time that are very targeted to those that are a longer duration. So that's a key piece there. The second topic is one relative to artificial intelligence. So I've taken a stance because we have a very nascent wargaming capability at Marine Corps University. Our wargaming directorate stood up 2.5 years ago, and so we've been building a foundation from a wargame standpoint, and frankly don't have the time to do justice to leveraging artificial intelligence and exploring the opportunities of artificial intelligence, which I think are really 3 things. One is artificial intelligence as the adversary, and you're playing against the AI. The other is that it is an advisor, like a planning aid, and then third, from just helping with the data analysis with the game, right? So when you play a game and being able to quickly discern what happened in the game and give you feedback in the after action tools. So I think those are 3 use cases that, I don't have the time to do that. We are doing some experimentation at Marine Corps University from the planning realm, like the AI as enabling planning and curating, a set of publications that it is sifting through to give the students, advice on what to do. And I think there's some good work, particularly with Dr. Ben Jensen there at the university, in that realm. But from a wargaming standpoint, I think that's where I would ask for help across the community, because I intend to leverage that as people figure that out,
Right.
then bring it in.
Thanks, Tim. And Admiral Garvin, what can the wargaming community give you, sir? Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you again for the question. And I agree with my previous fellow panelists here. I'm going to take it a little bit even higher. Hearkening back to what Admiral Winnefeld talked to us about yesterday, and he talked in terms of ends, ways, and means, and of course the operational environment in which we find ourselves. Right. So if we consider the fact that the ends are relatively steady, if you will, the international rules-based order, okay, that's kind of held as a constant. And if you look at sort of the means, being the budget that we are in, We can add in that if we want to, the inability to seem to get an appropriation. So what's going to change the outcome, right? It's going to be the ways. And so what this crowd in particular can do is help us understand what is going to be the next big change in the character of war. Obviously physics-based, obviously, but not limited by sort of the evolutionary steps, but what's the revolutionary steps? So Tim hit on a little bit, so how is AI going to actually be employed? Whether it's on our team or is it man-machine teaming? Is it an is it the enemy? Is it the adversary? Probably all of that, right? In some sense. And what's the next version of large language models? What's the next thing that's going to hit a little bit unexpectedly? I would submit that probably this crowd is better suited to see that future more rapidly than we will inside of our institutions. We all have a lot of things going on, but again, the power of many vastly exceeds the power of few in that regard. So kind of what my panelists have said alongside me. Over.
Hey, thanks, sir. And I know at some point we're all looking for that defense acquisition game that we can play and figure that one out. That would be an appropriate one. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some time for some audience Q&A, and we have a microphone here at the front of our room. So please don't feel shy. Please come on up and ask one of our panelists a question. And we're standing by for those. All right, awesome. Yes, ma'am, please.
Hi there. My name's Julianne Crow. I'm with the Military Sealift Command. We participate all the time in Nickelwig and other wargaming. One of our biggest issues that Admiral Sobek talked about earlier today in the contested logistics was with regards to civilian mariners and the dearth of them. Right? We don't have enough to sail our entire fleet. We see this white-carded frequently. How are issues like that escalated so that we are prepared for the fight tomorrow?
Well, each of our panelists cover that. And actually, maybe we'll start on this end. Admiral Garvin, do you want to go first this time, sir?
Happy to, just because we have directly hit on that point in partnership with. We just ran a bit of a TTX Wargame-esque event with Brookings and brought in some of those folks that we don't typically bring in logistics Wargames, which seems kind of strange to me that we don't bring in Maersk, we don't bring in Lloyd's of London, we don't bring in some of these folks who obviously have an incredibly vested interest in shipping worldwide. And what I found interesting from the results of that conversation were the degree to which we saw the world wildly differently. On the military side, we seemed to go right to the kinetics, and for them it was about insurance calculus and sort of how do they mitigate the risk to the bottom line. And they sort of didn't think, I don't think, they didn't see it as what it might actually be. All shipping stops. Right? And of course, that wasn't in the calculus. So I think what the lesson we learned from that is we need to do a better job of including all the stakeholders that have a play in it. So thank you for the question, and defer to my fellow panelists.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a deficiency in our wargaming and fully exploring all of those options. And some of our, particularly from the education standpoint, a lot of our scenarios are very targeted in the goals that we're trying to get from a purely joint warfighting standpoint, and incorporating tools and capabilities and organizations outside of the Department of Defense and incorporating them into games. We have one game in particular at Command and Staff College that is a scenario at the Joint Task Force level where there's a deliberate effort to bring in other organizations outside of DoD into that event. It's always challenging because the warfighting aspect and, from a fires, targeting, all that kind of stuff ends up consuming a lot of the time and attention and never quite do justice to the other capabilities out there. So I think you're hitting on something that is admittedly a deficiency that we could certainly improve on. The challenge is, packing that in the time and space of a game, and it tends to get overrun by the specific joint warfighting aspects that we're trying to get after. So, I think there's other organizations outside of Marine Corps University that are looking at that. I know the Commandant's Office in Net Assessment is doing some gaming that does look more broadly at specifically areas like you're talking about, and thinking more deeply about it and having the time to really look beyond just the military aspects and looking at what is the impact out there in the civilian business, commercial world, and then how might that also both enable or help us from a military standpoint, the objectives, and also impacting missions. So there are organizations that are looking at that. I think from an education standpoint, it tends to get trumped by the JPME, the Joint PME objectives that we're trying to hit that don't quite adequately hit that.
So I think it's a great question. The number of things here. First of all, this is where COVID was a great blessing, because you couldn't get paper towels to save our lives. Okay, so all of a sudden you say the supply chain needs to be fixed. And so that actually became a national issue and a global issue, actually. So this is an area that's oftentimes put by the side, and again, white-carded. But there's also another way to do this. One of the reasons why, and you've heard it, that those kinds of issues are sometimes put on the side. You don't have enough money, enough time, enough people, enough anything. But if you did some AI simulations and some modeling and simulations, and you started to take the elements that are part of a full war game, full war, and you take those as lessons learned, really understand what happened to those, then imprint those or include those or bring them in. So if it's the same, if it's the same set of conditions, whatever it might be, and you do elements of gaming in those elements that are oftentimes bypassed, but then you insert them. They are insertions into the battle problem. Now you're beginning to understand it. So wanting to game the whole elephant, to mix a metaphor badly, but if you wanted to try to do the whole thing, it's almost too hard. It's too expensive. It's too resource. But if you do it in elements and then you have a continuation. So at NPS a number of years ago, about 7 years ago, we did a warfighting continuum exercise that we've been doing now for many years on our own, and it was about end of warfare in a contested environment. We've done all that, doing what we do, but then we should be bringing that into a larger war game about what we learned about warfighting in a contested environment. And lo and behold, it's in the Indo-Pacific region. So you've got to think about this through holistically as a federation of elements that then feed into a larger kind of landscape. Again, shipping is a big issue. So the fact that maritime stakeholders need to be involved in this, along with air and space and all those. But I think you can get to it, but not all in one piece.
Excellent. Thank you, ma'am. Sir, the floor is yours next. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So my name is, firstly, thank you for the panel. My name is Dan Sofio. I'm with Govini Defense Acquisition Software Company, but in a previous life, I was at CSIS, and I'm a recovering economist. So I guess I have two questions. One is kind of a two-finger on the previous one. So we ran a few economic war games back in the day. And, of course, as is economics, and especially the further you go back when economic security was maybe less of an exciting issue, I've always found it exciting, but to people that it is now, right, one of the issues that we dealt with is, trying to imagine war games sort of in non-traditional battle spaces, right? So that would be, I think this is true for economic domain. This is also true for cyber, other places where there's a lot of civilian infrastructure potentially involved. So my first question is, how do you proxy things like that into game design? And maybe, what do you think are effective practices for doing that? And then my second question, I think, getting to the discussion about Ukraine and sort of, innovations at the edge, is how do you best proxy, that kind of entropy into war game design? Thank you very much.
Okay, so how do you work in economics, and how do you work in sort of disruptive entropy in war? And we kind of touched on some of that. I think we'll reverse the order this time. Admiral Rondo, do you want to go first and comment on that?
No.
Excellent. Okay.
So great question, and this particularly gets to, the strategic level of war and the elements of national power, and the DIME acronym of diplomatic, information, military, and economic power is something that our war colleges in particular are focused on wargaming. So I'll just use an example from the game that's going on this week at Marine Corps War College, where what we've done from an economic power is, and it's a combination with information and command and control, is we've got an action point mechanic in the game that is generated through economic power in combination with command and control that gives each country, a certain number of action points. So if you've got, 92 action points for one country, and the other country is then attacking it with cyber, with space, with some kind of economic strangulation, that then dives down, and you reduce the ability of that country to take action in the game. And that tends to be over time. And we've played year-long turns in competition, and then when we get in a conflict, it's a month-long turn. And you're trying to measure, and it's hard, right? When you're doing a month-long turn in a game at the global level, it's abstract. It's very simplified. But you have to account for things like oil production and what happens over time in a prolonged war if that gets disrupted. And what is the impact then on how long can a country operate effectively when its command and control infrastructure is getting disrupted, when its economic power is being disrupted. And we, from a game standpoint, in game terms, usually an action point mechanic of some kind is a great way to model that. And we're using exactly that in our game that we're running now at the War College.
Outstanding.
The only reason why I didn't want to go first is because I thought that it was important to go to the actual gaming of this thing. Economic warfare is always involved in war and is about national will and reducing national will. So I would submit that you can go and wage economic warfare and not fire a piece of ordnance shot. And we see it today. So I think that we've come into a place in time with the globalization of the economy. And again, I think that COVID let us see this in a raw way. You can reduce national will, you can break national spirit, you can break national will without firing a shot, by making sure that the economics is not going in the right way for the enemy or for the competitor. And we see this, and it goes very quickly into ethics war. So the economic warfare that goes on precedes firing war, because it oftentimes will be the cause for the actual war. And the economic warfare is real. It's clear, it is complex. It is as complex as anything that we've done, and it needs to be gamed strategically as well as operationally, because it has as much of an impact upon national will today as ordnance on target. And if you deny people water, food, transportation, mobility, none of that talks about ordnance on target. That's about influencing national will and the ability of a country and a people to live.
Thanks, ma'am. Admiral Garvin, anything on that?
No, I want to make sure we hear this question as well. I thought both answers were quite good. To my mind, it's the effects is the proxy. So you just got to go straight to effects in your turn, points awarded in actions. Sir.
Thanks, sir. Yeah.
Thanks, Admiral. And thanks, panel. My name's Dan Drake, call signs Dice Man. Yeah, Pete and I go back a little bit. I know, and I know Admiral Rondeau too, so great to see the panel. And I do not want to toss the grenade into the room, but Admiral Rondeau, you did say distributed once. I was taking notes the whole time. And I know a lot of us are here because we're curious about LVC. And this was a very philosophical, academic discussion about war games. I appreciated it a lot. I would like to just very quickly, and I know you guys know I don't want to go into too much detail about this, and you guys know my background. Tell me what your opinion is about LVC, because I feel a little bit like we went backwards. And Admiral Rondeau, you just said expensive. And LVC, the L part of LVC goes back into the old early days, the turn of the century when we were, flying the aggressor squadron still and really spending the gas money out there on the ranges. And now we're back on the ranges and we're all proud of ourselves when actually VC does the job, has the fidelity, and hits all the marks and flexes the muscles that we need to. I'd just quickly like your opinions on that. Again, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I promise I didn't pay him to ask the question. It's great to see you again. All right, so this goes to my mind, the reveal to deter and the conceal to win. Like, it just goes right back to that, a bit of a hackneyed phrase, but still apropos. And as we're thinking about our wargaming capability and the capability of others, remember we had this conversation about capacity, right? We just can't get enough. And oh, by the way, it's rather costly to move the entire pack fleet, 500 or so folks. We had 137 different commands playing in Global 17. There's a limited amount of times you can do that per year and have real outcomes. So to my mind, it goes directly to the pipes and how we connect our different wargaming centers so that we can really do LVC as it's meant to be done. Do the things on the range that must be done on the range, but no more, unless you want to have a particular deterrent effect on your adversary, and then show them it. Right? But if we can get into the virtual constructive, the constructive part actually to me is actually the more interesting one, is how you make it seamless across L and V, right? L, I got it. V, pretty easy. We've seen Ender's Game, right? But how do you get to the constructive side? So thanks for the question, and I'll defer to my other panelists.
I think that Admiral Garvin has that exactly right. A lot of LVC is still done in islands, and it's kind of in its own piece. I think that he is exactly right. The pipes to be able to connect that are really important. But I think the LVC is good. I think the actual is good. I think it's a good balance. I'm not an either or person about most things, so I think that it's a combination. But how do you bring them together so that they all they're not their own little franchises? And that's part of the connecting of concepts to capability to technology and making that kind of conceptual connection. So, what are the innovative new concepts? The big ideas. Admiral Garvin had touched on that. What are the big ideas? And you're going to come up with the big ideas when you bring as much as you can. I'm for LVC. I'm for ranges. They both count.
I'm just going to pile on with it. Goes back to the purpose, and what are you trying to accomplish and why? And I would say, generally speaking, from a wargaming standpoint, if the wargaming is about triggering a decision process, which usually is the case of a wargame, you don't need all the command and control systems. You can have a tabletop game that's generating a situation that you make a decision off of. You can have a simulation that's generating it. But if your purpose, I would say, jumps into more of a training realm, where you want to create an immersive environment around a training audience, and your purpose is giving them an immersive experience with making decisions in the context of their training systems that they're using in real life, right? It's not just about making a decision, but it's making a decision in the context of your command and control systems. Then I think LVC has direct relevance, but I think we're stepping into a training realm. From my standpoint, I don't dive into that realm because I'm mainly in the education space, but I think it really fundamentally goes back to what's your purpose, and then LVC can serve that, particularly from an immersive training standpoint.
Thank you so very much. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap up. So please join me in a round of applause for our panelists today. All right. But ladies and gentlemen, don't disappear right away. The second half of our gaming program is about to begin. We have a series of game demonstrations that'll take place on this side of the room. We have Littoral Commander, Indo-Pacific, presented by Sebastian Bay. We have CNA's illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing game, IUU fishing game that's being presented. Dr. Carl Selke and his team from Group W is demonstrating Foundations of Analytic Wargaming, a look at computer-assisted wargaming environment. And then finally, we also have a game developed by the RAND Corporation entitled Hegemony that is being presented by Natalie Maver-Kwan in the far corner as well. So please join us in checking out these games. But as you do, and to get you into the mood for gaming, please listen to this short audio clip.
Yes, they do.
How can it talk?
It's not a real voice. This box just interprets signals from the computer and turns them into sound.
Shall we play a game?
Oh.
I think I missed them.
Yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Love to. How about
but our game demonstration is not weird. So please join us in the far right. Enjoy the games. We'll reconvene at 5 o'clock for a panel with our gamers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Later.